I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I'm not exactly sure how to start this. I suppose I should start by telling you something about the brewery. It's old, of course, very old, and it was founded in 1778. Yes, I think that's right. So, it's a very old brewery, and we use traditional production methods, and the products themselves are very, very old. As you can see, and we have an imperial stout, which is very, again, very traditional, and it's described as dark, immense, rich, with a depth of burnt fruitiness. This beer is an ideal nightcap. Imperial Stout is 50% stronger than any of the other beers in the export premium range. There. We also do a lager. We also make a lager, which is European, a European type beer, and well, sales have increased a lot over the last year. Of course, we were a family firm. Well, in fact, we still are a family firm. As you know, the the present owner is Ben Westwood. There was a takeover bid. I'm not exactly sure when, but it was resisted, and we continue to run as a family firm. And this is important for the corporate image. Well, in fact, this is why we're here today, to discuss the corporate image and decide if it needs to change. We also have horses. You may have seen them delivering beer to the local pubs. Yes? Yes. Production has actually dropped a little over the last few years, although profits have actually held up. And that's something we need to discuss. I mean, can we actually continue as a small independent brewery? Anyway, that's about it. So that is the main question today. So I don't know whether that helps at all, but it's all I can think of really. So I'll leave. I think that's that. So I'll leave it there. Okay.
Right, the tour. I've got some overheads here to give you a picture of... Oh, well, never mind. We'll manage without. Anyway, I'll tell you something about the plant we'll be having a look around. I don't know how much you know about us. Perhaps some of you have been here before. Anyway, I'll start by telling you a bit about the plant, so that later you can ask questions, and it should help to understand the process. So, here we are in the main building. Hello, and welcome to Standard Electronics. I'm Jeff Maxwell, the factory manager in charge of the plant you'll be seeing today. I know some of you have come a long way today, so we aim to make your tour both interesting and worthwhile. Before we start the tour, I'd like to give you a brief presentation about the company. This will help to put the production side of the business into context. My talk will last about 15 minutes, and I'll be using the flip chart. Now, there's quite a lot to cover, so I'd be grateful if you'd hold any questions until the end of my talk. As you can see, I've divided up my presentation into three main parts. Firstly, we'll run briefly through the history of the company. Secondly, I'll tell you something about our main markets. This is important in understanding the production process. And finally, I'll come to the people, our most important asset. Okay? Let's start with the history. Standard started out as a private limited company when it was first established in 1935. In any case, I'll tell you something about the plant so that later you can ask questions. And it should help to understand the process. So, here we are in the main building. Not much of a building. Anyway, we've been based here for more than 50 years. One of the country's best-loved engineering firms. Anyway, it started back in 1943 when there was a need for high-quality connections. You know, the sort Britain's famous for. What we use is a process called pre-pyridine electrostatic coating. In this process, we apply important in understanding the production process. And finally, I'll come to the people, our most important asset. Okay, let's start with the history. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to give you a history lesson, just a few key dates. Standard started out as a private limited, went public. So we've had a pretty eventful 60 years or so. Anyway, I'll leave the history there. If you're interested, you'll find more about Standard in this pretty brochure. You should find one of them amongst all the other bits of paper our PR people love to give out. So let's turn now to a brief overview of our main markets. If you look at this chart, you'll see our slice of the pie, which in the European region, respectively. By the way, you may have seen the story in the news today about our main competitor, Manton. It seems they're going to bring out a new product which could seriously infringe the copyright lawsuit. So we'll have to wait and see how the market reacts. Anyway, let me get back to what I was saying about new markets for Standard. I think we have to say that nobody really knows what the next century will bring. What's for sure is you need people who can adapt quickly. And that brings me to the final part of this short introduction to Standard, and that is to talk about our people. As I said, they are our most important asset. Our total worldwide headcount, developed staff. We've even sponsored a group to sail around Britain. So, before I go on, are there any questions about our personnel policy?
The significance of these figures incorporating data from multi-center studies cannot be underestimated. Next slide. In the American part of the survey, it was found that success in business can be correlated directly with leadership styles. An individualistic style appears to be closely associated with rapid career path progression, whereas a group or participative style, despite its evident attractiveness to all members of staff, is correlated with a relatively slow career progression. Next slide. This is further illustrated in my next slide, which shows the results of another survey into senior management attitudes. Although lip service is paid to the concept of participative management, the real perceptions of leadership qualities completely contradict this view. It can be further seen that such surveys
we can't really afford to ignore these results. The survey was one of the most extensive of its kind and covers a wide range of corporations. Thank you. We can see in this next slide the results from the American part of the survey. This survey was based on interviews carried out with senior managers in 200 corporations. You can see here, 35% of the group of managers classified as participative reached senior management positions. On the other hand, 74% of the more individualistic managers achieved senior management status. So, I think the conclusion is self-evident. If you want to reach the top of American companies, you have a much better chance if you adopt a fairly autocratic, top-down approach. What is important here is not to dismiss the last 10 years. 10 years in which the value of participative management has been preached. Now, what we must do is to better understand the motivation of senior management. Thank you. If we look at this next slide, we can see the results from another survey into senior management attitudes. This shows how managers, firstly, evaluate the qualities of a good manager, and secondly, how they evaluate the qualities of a good leader. What is quite clear is that managers are supposed to be sensitive, adaptable, and cooperative, while leaders need to be decisive, dynamic, and single-minded. So, we find there is a massive contradiction. Good managers are supposed to be participative, to make sure they consult and discuss. Good leaders are supposed to be strong individuals able to make decisions on their own.
So, we need to think about the products. Our premium export lager is described as a German-branded Pilsner with an above-average alcohol content. It's positioned at the top end of the market and is only available through selected merchants and retailers. Anyway, I'm sure you're all familiar with that product. Our high malt bottled bitter Rutters is described as a traditional West Country bitter with a very dark colour and thick consistency. It has a high price for a bottled bitter and is available through all major supermarket chains and off licences. As you can see, production in 1984 was around the 245,000 bottles, and then during the next 5 years increased steadily. 5 years ago, the annual output reached 480,000 bottles there, as you can see. And as you can see, the figures stayed at that sort of figure until last year, when they dipped to 460,000 there, as you can see. A very important, perhaps the most important element in our corporate identity is our product range. The first thing to be said about this product range is that it's very diverse. Let's take our premium export lager, Hohenbrau. Now, this product has always been positioned at the top end of the market. It has a very high price and it's only available through specialist retail outlets. Altogether, it's quite exclusive. On the other hand, our Rutters Bitter has an entirely different personality. It's brewed in a traditional way. We put a lot of malt in it, which gives it a rich golden colour. And as far as I know, it's at a medium price and sold through most supermarkets. So, as you can see, these are two very different products. One, an upmarket German-type Pilsner. The other, a very English bitter. Our problem is we're no longer sure about what sort of brewery we are. Anyway, let's leave the products for a moment and turn to our recent record on the production side. To make sure we're all in the picture, I prepared a graph which illustrates our production record over the last 12 years. As you can see, we're only going to be looking at bottled beer production. Now, 12 years ago, we had an annual output of 245,000 bottles, as you can see. Over the next 6 to 7 years, production grew steadily and reached 480,000 way back in 1990. Those were the easy years. It seemed all we had to do was turn up at work, produce the beer, and the beer would sell itself. The last 5 years have been quite different. Production flattened out to around 480,000 for 4 years, and then, more worryingly, dropped to 460,000 last year. So, This is the background to our meeting today. We can no longer sit back and let the well-established name of Westwood do the work for us.
These cost cuts are going to cause considerable pain. We need to draw up a plan of action. I have put some ideas on the board. These are some of the measures we could consider. There are broadly three approaches. First, we could accept the cuts and reduce staff drastically. Secondly, we could fight and hope to achieve some reduction in the level of the cuts. Or thirdly, and this is what I support, we could put forward an alternative proposal. Now, this would mean we have to organize these cost cuts are going to cause considerable pain. We need to draw up a plan of action. I have put some ideas on the board. These are some of the measures we could consider. There are broadly three approaches. First, we could accept the cuts and reduce staff drastically. Secondly, we could fight and hope to achieve some reduction in the level of the cuts. Or thirdly, and this is what I support, we could put forward an alternative proposal. Now, this would mean
Yes. Production has actually dropped a little over the last few years, although profits have actually held up. And that's something we need to discuss. I mean, can we actually continue as a small independent brewery? Anyway, that's about it. So that is the main question today. So I don't know whether that helps at all, but it's all I can think of really. So I'll leave. I think that's that, so I'll leave it there, okay. So, before we move on to discuss these matters, let me just summarise the main issues as I see them. Firstly, on the product side, there's the question of diversity of product range. Secondly, on the marketing front, we need to review our distribution network. And thirdly, on the personnel side, we need to look at the sort of employer we are and want to become. So, I suggest we look at things in that order: product, distribution, and people. Hopefully this will help us to agree on a clear way forward. Right. Before we start, are there any questions you'd like to ask?
You seem to have completely ignored the question of male domination of top management posts. Don't you think your results are almost entirely due to the fact that there are practically no women in senior positions in American companies?
I did not address the question of gender because it was not my purpose to address it. No doubt it would be interesting to discuss it on another occasion.
Dr. Linden, if you don't mind me asking, could you tell us how the respondents assess difficult concepts, such as individualism?
Well, it is not important, but if you want to know, just a moment. Yes. As I thought, we used the Belbin personality test to position respondents.
Dr. Linden, could I ask you how the surveys were set up? You know, did they use a control group?
I believe they used a control group. These weren't my surveys, you know. I can't tell you the details.
You seem to have completely ignored the question of male domination of top management posts. Don't you think your results are almost entirely due to the fact that there are practically no women in senior positions in American companies?
I think that's a very interesting point. I'm afraid I didn't have time to address the question of gender itself because I was mainly concentrating on the question of management style. However, I feel sure that this aspect would be worth discussing at length on another occasion.
Dr. Linden, if you don't mind me asking, could you tell us how the respondents assess difficult concepts, such as individualism?
Of course. I suppose you're referring to the second survey I mentioned. Well, I'll just check if I may. Yes, as I thought. We used the Belbin personality test in order to position respondents. I think that you'll find that this is a fairly standard psychological test with such management surveys. Are there any more questions you would like to ask about the trial?
Dr. Linden, could I ask you how the surveys were set up? You know, did they use a control group?
I think I see what you mean. You are interested in the procedure followed for the surveys.
That's right.
I'm afraid that's really outside my field. I myself was not involved in carrying out the surveys. However, I can give you the references afterwards if they would be helpful.
Thank you.
Right.
Good morning. Some of you may know me better than others, so let me just briefly introduce myself. My name's Joanna Brooks, and I'm in charge of public relations for Westwood Brewery. As you may know, this is a relatively new post, and its creation reflects the board's concern over our position and image in the market. So, one of my first tasks is to define a clear company identity for Westwood, one that will carry us forward into the next century. For this reason, I've asked you all to join me here today to hear your views on a way forward for Westwood. Some of you have been with the brewery for many years, others not at all. So before we start, I'd like to outline three main aspects which I see contributing significantly to the brewery's identity. The first aspect is the products. The second, our markets and distribution in particular. And the third key element is our people. So, let's just spend the next few minutes reviewing these three elements. And please interrupt me if you have any questions or points you'd like to raise as we go along. So, the products. Arguably the most important element in our corporate identity is our product range. The first thing to be said about these products is that they're very diverse. Well, let's take our premium export lager, Hohenbrau. Now, this product has always been positioned at the top end of the market. It has a high price and it's only available through selected retail outlets. Altogether, it's quite exclusive. On the other hand, our Rutters Bitter has an entirely different personality. It's brewed in a traditional way. We put a lot of malt into it, which gives it a rich golden colour. And as far as I know, it's always been sold at a medium price and is available through most supermarkets. So, as you can see, these are two very different products. One, an upmarket German-type Pilsner, the other, a very English bitter. One point for discussion, then, is whether we should maintain such different products in our range. Let's move on to marketing. And I only want to raise one issue. It's connected with the products, really. It seems to me it's going to be very difficult strengthening Westwood's identity in the market when some of our beers are only available through specialist outlets.
Excuse me, if you don't mind me saying, I think you'll find there are very good reasons for restricting the channels for some of our beers.
That's interesting you should say so, and I look forward to hearing more about that in our discussions. Perhaps we can leave it. There are probably very good product reasons why, but that these may conflict with the promotion of the total company image. Would you agree?
That's certainly true.
So, that covers two of the elements, which I think we need to discuss. The third element is the people. And primarily here, I mean the brewery workers and the management. One of the things that shocked me when I first joined Westwood was this organisation chart. It's like something from the last century. Do you realise there are 10 layers between the shop floor workers and the managing director? In my view, this makes the company slow and unresponsive. I know there are many good things about Westwood, but our image is much the same as it was in, say, the times of Queen Victoria, a very traditional, paternalistic employer. Well, the very least we need to do is discuss whether this image is appropriate for the late 20th century, let alone the 21st. So, before we move on to discuss these matters, let me just summarise the main issues as I see them. Firstly, on the product side, there's the question of diversity of product range. Secondly, on the marketing front, we need to review our distribution network. And thirdly, on the personnel side, we need to look at the sort of employer we are and want to become. So, I suggest we look at things in that order: product, distribution, and people. Hopefully this will help us to agree on a clear way forward. Right. Before we start, are there any questions you'd like to ask?